and welcome to part two of the two witnesses revealed. And this is a little excerpt that I had from a Facebook page. And I encourage all of y'all before we get back into our study. I encourage y'all to go to my Facebook page and some of the content that I have there. That's how I spell my name. And I said some of these things are pretty much read. I mean, for the reader, I should say. Uh, if you're an avid reader, you found a home. That's pretty much what I previously did on G Plus and a few other places. But now that that's no longer in effect, I don't post except for on YouTube and whatnot. So as you can tell, I'm not very good at talking about myself. These are just some things if you really want to get fed some serious revelations, this is where it goes. Because of the history. History mixed with the scriptures, you can never go wrong because things will make sense. And all of the things that are given to us, because make no mistake, if you're talking about the scriptures, they were only given to our people. We were responsible for sharing it to the rest of the world. And when we dropped the ball, it was taken from us. And now heathens rule over us. We're brutal, wicked, and have no covenant with the Most High. So let's get back into it but anyway, like I said, you can take a lot of these posts that I've had, a lot of different stuff, really, really extensive topics as well. I don't know where that came in. There's the board. I don't know where that was a repost of it. But really, really extensive stuff. 2019, a lot of stuff followed. A lot of stuff I got videos on. But anyway, let's get back into it because we were dropping off. Well, we got dropped off at Enoch, and we were just getting into the identification of the first witness. So, having said that, let's go back into it, and that would be all right. Now, just to recap, we were showing the history of the world, and like I said, I try to go back a little far, so if I'm moving too fast, forgive me. It takes you from, and this is the book of Enoch. It's called Hanok in Hebrew, but it's Enoch in English. And it takes you using animals, which if you don't know the history, can lose you. This is why it's imperative for our people to know our history and know where we come from. And where we come from begins with some of the books that are not included in the scriptures. And I'll give you a little recap of those books. I mean, Apocrypha, you already know about that one. Babylon, Pt.2, very instrumental book in learning our history. Babylon meaning the Babylon that we went through from Nebuchadnezzar, and Timbuktu being West Africa. And this is Rudolph Windsor. Really remarkably, this guy grew up like 2 miles from where I grew up, New Jersey. Anyway, very instrumental book. And this is the Synagogue of Satan. This tells you the history of Rothschilds, the Jewish race, the modern Jewish race. Gives you a little history of them. Notice the title of this baby: Secret History of Jewish World Domination. Really deep stuff. Anyway, let's continue. Now he goes here. He takes you from the Exodus. Like I said, he's using animals. So if you don't know the history, it can be very hard to follow because you won't know where to plug in the right part of history in the right place where he's talking, You get my drift? So it's hard to really follow him if you don't really understand the narrative of the Hebrews. Meaning that if you don't understand the story from Abraham, not just Abraham, but beginning with Adam. Enoch is seventh from Adam. So you have to follow Adam and Seth and all of the sons that he got leading to Enoch, Jared, all the way down to Enoch and Noah, Methuselah. Then you have to go to all of the other ones, the father of our nation, Abraham. And you have to follow and the story of the journey from the Exodus to us being, delivered into our land, delivered, and then to Jerusalem, where the Most High gave us the land He promised Abraham. You got to remember, He made promises to Abraham that weren't fulfilled until David. You're talking hundreds of years in between. And this particularly the 1619, 2019 prophecy, you're talking thousands of years before that came to pass. Or it's just coming to pass, to be honest. Now he talks about this, and he goes from all of these things, and you can get little excerpts from it and understand where they're coming from. It says, now the sheep grew and multiplied, but all those dogs, foxes, and wild boars feared and fled before them. And the ram attacked and killed all the wild beasts, and all of the wild beasts were no longer able to return among the sheep or to rob absolutely anything from them. Then that house became great and spacious, a lofty building that was built upon it for that sheep. And it was tall, and a great tower upon it for the master of the sheep. That the house was low, but the tower was really elevated and lofty. Then the master of the sheep stood upon that tower, and they offered a full table before him. This is starting with the story of David, and they're building the temple, Solomon and David. It says in there, and he saw again how the sheep went astray after Solomon, or beginning with Solomon, going in diverse ways and abandoned that house of his. Then the master of the sheep called some from among the sheep and sent them to the sheep. This would be the prophets. But the sheep began to slay them. So now we're going to pick up and we're going to keep going, because it goes from destruction of Jerusalem, goes through the whole history. And to recap who we're talking about here in the book of Enoch, this was to correlate with what we read in the book of Ezekiel, where it talks about in the places we saw in Daniel as well as Ezekiel, the man clothed with linen, as well as Revelation 11, where he talked about the two witnesses directly. And it says, this behold, man clothed with linen, which had the inkhorn by his side. Now this inkhorn represented that he was the writer. He was the one who recorded the deeds. And as I explained in the last video, part one rather, how Enoch was the one who was elevated to the Most High and to record the deeds of them. And I read to you before where he told him that he had a year to talk to his sons and all that. Other than that, he was coming with the Most High, and he was going to write down the deeds of mankind from that day forward to the end, or to the day of judgment. Now, moving on, it says, now then I saw, and this is after Alexander the Great, to the Greco-Syrian domination. The Greco-Syrian domination would have been Antiochus under the Greeks, which was the same as the Romans. They really went the transfer from what they call the Greco-Roman Empire started at this time, from where you had the Greek rulers of Antiochus and those guys who ruled from Rome as well, but they were under the Greek rulership, and then Julius Caesar changed it to the Romans, and that's where you got the Roman Empire. Well, anyway, he says, I saw how 37 shepherds were pasturing the sheep. All of them completed their duties in their own respective periods, like the former ones, and aliens took the sheep into their hands in order to pasture them in their own respective periods, in each in his own period. So these are talking about the people who ruled over us. And like I said in the last video at the end, that it was aliens that took over us. These were the heathens and the Gentiles. And I told you about the 2,300 years. This is when Alexander the Great and the times of the Gentiles began. And he says, and after that I saw with my own eyes all the birds of heaven, eagles. Remember this, as opposed to, let's go back into it. This is what we're seeing. And to come in real time, if you want to go to it, Revelation 18, this is what he means. Every unclean and hateful bird. That's what these birds are. Eagles, vultures, kites, and ravens. And they're represented by nations in this case. And the eagles were the ones who were leading all the birds. Like I said, you know who they are. The Romans were the eagles. They're represented by that. And they began to eat those sheep, and dig out their eyes and eat their flesh. This is the affliction of us beginning back in the Roman Empire. And they cried aloud, for their flesh was being eaten by the birds. And I too cried aloud and lamented in my sleep on account of that shepherd who was grazing the sheep. And that's the Messiah. And I kept seeing till those sheep were eaten by the dogs, the eagles, and the kites, and they left neither flesh, neither skin, nor sino. And they taught me this here because Messiah was crucified, as you know that they took him. And he was crucified so that, like Daniel says, that he was taken out of the way. But for us, he was establishment of salvation. So from where they sit, it was in the way. But from where we sit, it was salvation until we can get to the point where we can move them out the way permanently. Well, anyway, moving on. It says, I kept seeing till those sheep were eaten by the dogs. Now they got the dogs in them, the eagles and the kites, and they left neither flesh nor skin nor sino on them absolutely until their bones stood there bare, and their bones fell to the ground, and the sheep became few. And I kept seeing till 23 shepherds pastured the sheep, and all of them completed 58 seasons in their own respective periods. This is how deep Enoch gets into it. He gets into the periods in which all of these leaders that we don't pay any attention to, that have authority and rulership over masses of people, how the Most High appoints them, and they're held accountable. And they have respective seasons that they were supposed to. And most of the time, the Most High know how they're going to rule, so some of them don't even fulfill those seasons, prematurely dying because of the evil. You know, the scriptures tell you, you live by the sword, you die by it. So at any rate, what you reap, you will sow. Or what you sow, you will reap, rather. I hate when I mess that up. But anyway, he says, now, behold, the lambs were born from those snow white sheep. Now, when you're talking lambs, you're not talking like lambs like in the snow white color aspect of it, to where they were snow white sheep as opposed to the dirtier lambs. No, they were just saying snow white in terms of those were the purer ones. Those were the ones who were unblemished, and they were cleansed, and they were representing the righteous of the sheep, having nothing to do with color, because there were no Negro color, no Negro sheeps out there. So, and anyway, and they began to open their eyes and see, and cry aloud to the sheep. But as for the sheep, the lambs cried aloud to them, yet they, the sheep, did not listen to what the lambs were telling them, but became exceedingly deafened, and their eyes became exceedingly dim-sighted. And that's what they mean by the Maccabeans. The book of Maccabees tells you that story, to how they were trying to keep them adhering to the covenant, but yet they started adhering to the Gentiles, and it was over. You know, and that was the beginning of our world, of our woes, so to speak. Then I saw in a vision ravens flying above those lambs, and they seized one of those lambs, and then smashing the sheep, They ate them. And I kept seeing till those lambs grew horns, but the ravens crushed their horns. Then I kept seeing till one great horn sprouted on one of those sheep. Mm-mm-mm. So this one here was the one that he says that I saw in visions of ravens flying above those lambs, and they seized one of those lambs. If I was to guess, and then keep smashing them, the only black leader that we've had that came close, even though he was involved in Christianity, because he didn't profess Christianity as much as he did freedom and justice and the civil rights of our people, and that would be Martin Luther King. And he was seized by them, killed by them, and they continued ramping it up after that. After that, we've fallen into the worst slumbers that we've ever had. When they took him, they took everything we had as far as any hope of any justice and any kind of freedom and equality, similitude of equality. But anyway, he said he kept seeing until one of those lambs grew horns, but the ravens crushed their horns. Then I kept seeing till one great horn sprouted on one of those sheep, and he opened their eyes. Notice that this one says he didn't open their eyes. This one's opening their eyes. And they had vision in them, and their eyes were open. And he cried aloud to the sheep, and all the rams saw him and ran unto him. That's all of the Hebrew men, the soldiers, the black men. And in spite of this, all those eagles, vultures, ravens, and kites until now continue to rip the sheep like they're doing now, swooping down upon them and eating them. As for the sheep, they remain silent. The sheep is the ones who are the ones in charge, the shepherds, the preachers, the leaders, the cops, the scholars, the professors, the lawyers, all of those who learned and switched sides once they got there. He says they remain silent. And they did. None of our leaders, all of the billionaires, millionaires, we got black millionaires, not many of them, but we got few black billionaires, but we have many black millionaires. They're silent. Fear their own life. He says, but the rams are lamenting and crying aloud. He said, those ravens gather together and battle with him, the horned ram, and seek to remove his horn, but without any success. And I saw thereafter the shepherds coming, and those vultures and kites cried aloud to the ravens so that they should smash the horn of that ram. But he battled with them, and they fought each other. And he cried aloud while battling them so that Yahweh's help should come. And I kept seeing till that man who writes down the names of the shepherds and elevates them before the master of the sheep came. So this is Enoch talking in the second person, talking about himself in the story, saying he's the one, because he is the one who writes down the names of the shepherds and elevates them before the Most High. He said he came, and it is he who helped him and revealed to him everything. So this isn't the first witness. This is the second one. Enoch is telling you he's the second witness that comes after the first one emerges. And he said he came to help him and revealed to him everything. Thus help came for that ram. So he's saying now it's two of them. And I kept seeing till the master of the sheep, which would have been the Messiah, came upon them in wrath. And all who saw him fled and fell into darkness from before his face. All the eagles, vultures, ravens, kites gathered with all the sheep of the field lining up with him. And thus, having come together in unity, all of them cooperated in order to smash the horn of that ram. So Enoch is battling all of the regular people, but all of the vultures and the ravens, these are all the leaders and everything of all of the nations. I don't know which nations is who, but I know who the eagles are. And this is where they all talk about coming together to smite the horn of the lamb. That's the Most High talking about, when he stands at the end before he comes, that all of the world will stand against the children of Israel once they were delivered. Because remember, the prophecy says when we leave that 400-year captivity, we come out with great substance. So us being taught, as this scripture tells us, that their eyes began to open, that vision in them. That means we're fighting now. Now let's keep going. Now he says that they all came together and cooperated in order to smash the horn of that ram. And I saw that man who was writing a book by command of the master, who is Enoch. So he's saying, I saw myself as I was writing the book, for he opened the book of destruction, that book of destruction, which those 12 last shepherds caused. Remember, Enoch records every deed that man does. Angels record, and the Most High used the man as well. And he revealed before the master, the sheep, that they had much greater destruction than their predecessors. So he's saying that these last rulers, they did worse. And I kept seeing till the master of the sheep came unto them and took in his hand the rod of his wrath and smote the earth. And all the beasts and all the birds of heaven fell down in the midst of those sheep and were swallowed up in the earth. This is Armageddon. And it was covered upon. And then I saw a great sword was given to the sheep. That's us. And the sheep proceeded against all the beasts of the field in order to kill them. So all of those who oppressed us. And all the beasts and all the birds of heaven fled from before their face. It's on now, huh? So now they running, huh? Then I kept seeing till a throne was erected in a pleasant land. And he sat upon it for the master of the sheep. And he took all the sealed book and opened those very books in the presence of the master of the sheep. Then the master called those people, the first snow white ones, and ordered them to bring before them some from among those first stars that arose. They talk about that at the beginning of this story. As well as the first star which had fallen down earlier, that was Lucifer. And they brought him before him. The Most High is giving out judgment now to the angels first. And he spoke to the man who was writing in his presence, that's him, that man being one of these 7 snow whites, one saying, take those 7 shepherds to whom I had handed over the sheep, but who decided to kill many more than they were ordered. Remember, if the Most High put a curse on you, that means that he told some of these very shepherds, that's why they were killing us with such, indiscriminate fervor. You know what I mean? It just seems like millions of them from that guy Leopold in Africa. And oh my goodness, man, we just been one murderer desperate after another. And he says, and behold, I saw all of them bound, and they all stood before him. Then his judgment took place. First among the stars, they received their judgment and were found guilty, and they went to the place of condemnation. And they were thrown into an abyss full of fire and flame and full of the pillar of fire. Then those 70 shepherds were judged and found guilty. These are the same shepherds that were confounding the language at the Tower of Babel, to show you how old these presence of these fallen angels and how they mix with the children of man. Remember, there were, let me read that after this, but I'll take you to that. And it says, and they were cast into a fiery abyss, And in the meantime, I saw another abyss like it, full of fire, was open wide in the middle of the ground. And they brought those blinded sheep. Uh-oh. Now we talk about all of those of us who refuse to accept that this was our heritage and the Most High had a covenant with our people. And the reason why we continue to suffer is because we won't acknowledge that and remember his ways. So all of those who make it through Babylon, when they get over there, this is what you face. And all of which were found judged and found guilty and cast into the fiery abyss. And they were burned, and the abyss is to the right of that house. And thus I saw those sheep while they were burning, their bones were also burning. Then stood still, looking at the ancient house being transformed. This is the old house that we were kicked out of. All of the pillars and all the columns were pulled out, and the ornaments of that house were packed and taken out together with them and abandoned in a certain place in the south of that land. Only mean Africa, baby. And I went on seeing until the master of those sheep brought about a new house, which you hear about in Revelation, greater and loftier than the first one, and set it up in the first location, which had been covered up, and all its pillars were new. That's the place in Ariel, where I was reading to you, where David set up. His Jerusalem became Sodom and Egypt. This one is the first location, and he's saying that he's going to set up a new house there. And all of the ornaments new as well as greater than those of the first. That is the whole house which was gone, and all of the sheep were within it. Then I saw all of the sheep that had survived, as well as all of the animals upon the earth and the birds of heaven, falling down and worshiping those sheep. Making petition to them and obeying them in every respect. And thereafter, those three who were wearing snow white clothes, the former one who had caused me to go up, grabbed me by my hand, and the hand of that ram holding me, and ascended, and they sat me down in the midst of those sheep prior to the occurrence of those judgments. Those sheep were all snow white, and their wool were considerable and clean. And all of those which had been destroyed and dispersed, see? All of those which had been destroyed and dispersed, that's the scattering of the sheep. And he talks about this in the story in great detail. And the master and all of the beasts of the field and all of the sky were gathered together in that house. And the master of the sheep rejoiced with great joy because they had all become gentle and returned to his house. So he said everybody in the earth became gentle. And all of those who survived of the sheep and the birds, they were serving us. And I went on seeing until they had laid down the sword which was given to the sheep, meaning that we done finished killing everybody. And if you want to get into the details of that, you could read the War Scroll. It's found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. And they tell you all of the battles that we were going to have, or we are going to have, with all of the nations, starting with the Ishmaelites all the way down. Actually starting with the Romans or the Gentiles. Well, anyway, it says, I went on seeing until they had laid down the sword which was given to the sheep, and they returned to the house and sealed it in the presence of the master. And all the sheep were invited to that house, but could not contain them all. But it could not contain them all. Wow. So that means that all of us are coming back. There's a lot of us on the earth still. Now it says the eyes of all of them were open, and they saw beautiful things. Not a single one existed among them that could not see. And I noticed that the house was large, wide, and exceedingly full. And we're going to keep going because this closes it all the way out. I couldn't just finish out everything. And he said that, I'm going to finish anyway because it's only a few more passages. And he said, I saw that a snow white cow was born with huge horns. And all the beasts of the field and all of the birds of the sky feared him and made petition to him all the time. And I went on seeing until all their kindred were transformed and became snow white cows. and the first among them became something, and that something became a great beast with huge black horns on his head, and the master of the sheep rejoiced over it, and over all the cloud, all over all the cows. And I became satiated in their midst, then woke up and saw everything. This is the vision which I had saw while I was sleeping. And then I woke up and blessed the master of righteousness and gave him honor. And I wept with great weeping, and my tears could not stop till I had no more endurance left, but flowed down. And on account of what I had seen, until everything should come and be fulfilled. He didn't put I there. The deeds of the people were also shown to me, according to its type, each according to its type. And on that night I remembered the first dream and wept on its account. And I was restless because I had seen that vision. So that one was traumatic to him. I could imagine it was. He saw the whole history of the world in that particular passage. And, seeing us as sheep. Well, now that we identified that he is the one who writes down, remember, we're going to get back to it, where he says that he was coming and he commissioned Enoch, and he told Enoch every day, he said, you shall make your names and therefore I shall curse your days. Now, wait a minute, let me read right here. So and I'll get to that one, which is the same passage in Revelation or Genesis chapter 6, which is so deep about the book of Enoch. Book of Enoch, Genesis. See that? Genesis chapter 6 and Enoch chapter 6. See? Came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, the sons of Yah, so the daughters of men that they were afraid took them wives of all they choose. Right? That's what produced the giants. And these days when the children of man had multiplied, it happened that there were born unto them handsome and beautiful daughters. And the angels and the children of heaven saw them and desired them. And they said to one another, come, let us choose wives for ourselves from among the daughters of man, and begat us children. And it says, Semyaz, their leader, before he's Lucifer, or another name for Lucifer, being their leader, said to them, I fear that perhaps you will not consent that this deed should be done, and I alone will become responsible for this great sin. But they all responded to him and said, let us swear an oath and bind everyone among us by a curse, not to abandon this suggestion, but to do the deed. And they all swore together and bound one another by the cursed. And they were altogether 200, and they ascended unto Ardos, which is the summit of Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon. Let me give you an idea of where Mount Hermon is. And then we'll get back to Enoch. Okay, Mount Hermon. Matter of fact, let's go to images. See it? Can't make this stuff up. It's northern Israel. They're telling you this is the mount they came down on. Roman temples of Mount Hermon. See that? That's how far their idol worship and demon worship go back. Mount Hermon in Israel. See? Well, let's keep going. And it says, we'll go back to Enoch. It says, and their names were as follows. And it goes through all of the different names, and these are the chiefs of tens with them. And they took wives of them. Everyone respectively chose one woman for himself. And they began to go into them, have sex with them. And they taught them magical medicine, incantations, the cutting of roots, taught them about plants. And the women became pregnant and gave birth to great giants whose heights were 300 cubits. The ark wasn't even that big. And the giants consumed the produce of all the people until the people detested feeding. That's what caused oppression. He made them so the giants turned against the people in order to eat them. And they began to sin against the birds, the wild beasts, the reptiles, the fish, and their flesh. And they began to sin against each other. And was devoured by one by the other, and they drank blood. And then the earth brought an accusation against the oppressors. So this is what they have in common with them: the oppression. And it says Azazel taught people the art of making swords and knives. Okay, he's one. Okay. All right. And it tells you that he taught them how to make knives and swords, which is the weapons of war, the breastplates, showed their chosen ones bracelets, decorations, the shadowing of the eye with antimony, ornamentation, the beautifying of the eyelids, all the kinds of precious stones, and all the coloring tinctures and alchemy, chemistry. And there were many wicked ones, and they committed adultery and erred, and all their conduct became corrupt. So he's saying that Azazel taught men to do all of these different things. And Asmarus, which was another one, taught incantation and the cutting of roots. Right? And it revolved around incantations. I guess that's spells and whatnot. And it says Barachiel taught it astrology. And Kokakarel Kokarel. I'm sorry, guys. Had to sound that one out. Kokarel, the knowledge of the signs. So let's count them. 1, 2, 3. Barachiel, Kokariel, 4. Tamaliel taught the seeing of the stars, 5. Azrael taught the course of the moon, 6. Right? Wait a minute. I think I skipped over something. He says, then Michael, Suri, and Gabriel, okay, observed early from the sky, and they saw much being blood on the earth. So right there, we caught 6. Let me count them again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Remember the 7 heads, the dragon? That's because of this oath. The devil is not one person per se. It's an oath of many fallen angels, these being the leaders. You never heard that anywhere before. That's because most people don't have revelation knowledge. And you get that from reading the prophets. So this is the 7 heads represented here, where it talks about the dragon. Let's look at that. And then we'll get back into the 2 witnesses and close out. Now, Peter, a wonder in heaven. So it tells you that this, what we're talking about right here, these were the ones who came from heaven. But remember, they descended. See, the children of heaven. Right? So let's go back there to Revelation. And he says now, And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Those were the captains. And 7 crowns upon his heads, meaning the royalty was in the heads, meaning that these 7 people I just counted out, those were the ones wearing the crowns. They taught the people. They gave the information that has been preserved till today. And it says that his tail drew a third part of the stars of heaven. So when you hear about stars in the scriptures, it's a metaphor. It's another word for fallen angels or the Malachim, the angels. He cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was the remnant of the children of Israel. We're the ones the Most High married to. Remember the marriage feast? We're the bride. He's the bridegroom. Yes, that's what that means. So just to show you the link between all of these narratives, Enoch, the scriptures, is as far as Genesis and everything is connected. The history is key. It's an integral part of understanding it. Now let's get back to the passages with there. So now for us to understand the second witness, the first one, and we'll get to Enoch in another video. Now let's go back to Enoch. The 2 witnesses, and we established that Enoch was the one with the inkhorn, the one who wrote down everything. He's the one who explained all of the going-ons of heaven and the fallen angels and what they did. Even gets more detailed than that. It's blood-curdling, some of the things that Enoch deals with and that he saw. Well, anyway, he says that he would give power. The Most High is talking about these 2 witnesses again. And like I said in the last video, these were the witnesses that wore the white linen, and they were the two olive trees. And like I said, the 2 olive trees, the 2 witnesses, the 2 candlesticks. And he says, now if any man will hurt them, fire proceedeth out of their mouth and devoureth their enemies. Right? And if any man hurt them, he must be in this manner be killed. And these have the power to shut up heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy. So now we're going to reveal the second one. Now the second one, to find out where these are, by the characteristics. Plus in Enoch, we saw in Enoch chapter 90 that he was battling them. So that means there's going to be a great war between these witnesses and man and the rulers or the authority of this earth, the beast, who all of the world had been given into his hands. Now he got to give it up. So remember that he says that all of the world was going to come. He says, now all of the eagles, vultures, kites gathered with all the sheep of the field, lining up with him, having come together in unity, all of them cooperated in order to smash the horn of that ram, which was Enoch. Well, this next one, the primary. So let's go to the primary. He's the messenger. He's the one that the Most High said that I read about in, let's go into, behold, I send my messenger. Put it out. All right, now look. Behold, I send my messenger. So this is the same one that he sent, and he shall suddenly come into his temple, which we read about in Enoch, even the messenger of the covenant. Okay? So this messenger prepares the way. And he's the one that opens our eyes and is our king and leader after we leave America. And as according to that, he says that he calls to the rams for all of them to come to him, as it says. Now remember that now. He says, now he cried aloud to the sheep, this ram, and all the rams saw him and ran unto him. So we ran unto him for him to lead us. And then the whole world lines up against us with him as our leader. Now let's keep going. And he says he's going to be, he said, who can abide at the day of his coming? Meaning that he's going to be terrible to the earth. Those are the people who don't want to repent and change their ways and acknowledge the fact that the Most High is coming for his people, and that anybody in the way is just that, in the way, and you will be removed. And he said, who can stand when he appeareth? For he is like a refiner's fire. And it says, now he shall purify the sons of Levi and purge them. So let's find out who that is. Now, first we're going to do that. I had to close those down so I could see that. So we're going to go to 2 Kings. As a matter of fact, let's go to the first. Let's go to the first one. Now it says, now Elijah the Tishbite, one of the few of the prophets who you don't even know where he comes from, just says that where he lived. No genealogy, no mother or father. And it said, who was of the inhabitants of Gilead. And he said unto Ahab, as Yahweh of Israel liveth, before whom I stand. Remember, he's those candlesticks who stand before the Elohim. Remember you read that? He said that there shall not be rain, nor rain these years, but according to my word. So he comes in on the very first scene that you hear of Elijah. He come in telling you that I'm going to shut up the rains in the heavens. Now let's go back. This is the first clue of the witness. He said he's had the power to shut up the heavens, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy. So let's go back. First Kings 17, right? And he said, and Yahweh, the word of Yahweh came unto him, saying, get thee from here, or leave here, and go thee eastward, and hide himself in the brook of Cherith, that is before Jordan. And the ravens brought him bread and flesh in the morning, and bread and flesh in the evening, and he drank of the brook. Ain't that, see, the Most High had the animals feeding him. Brought him bread and flesh. And it came to pass after a while that the brook dried up, because there had been no rain in the land, that he had told to stop raining. Now, he healed the child too, which I thought was different from any prophet other than the Messiah. See? Woman who let him in the house and gave him shelter, he complained to the Most High that he didn't want her son to die after all of the wonderful and kind things she did for him. So the Most High bestowed that upon him. And he said he stretched himself on the child 3 times. And I know that may sound kind of vulgar to some of your evil-minded ones, but he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried to Yahweh and said, O Yahweh, my Elohim, I pray thee, let this child's soul come into him again. And the voice of the Elohim came in, And he heard the voice of Elijah, and the soul of the child came into him again, and he was revived, and he revived. So he brought him back to life. Most High healed him, resurrected him, so to speak, under. Now let's get into this part. So we're seeing some of the things that would make it to where you can't acknowledge anything else but him as being it. Now let's look at it. He tells them there he's meeting with them, because the story goes that it came to pass after many days, the word of Yahweh came to Elijah in the 3rd year, and he said, "Go yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth." So remember, after the last one, the child died. That was the last insert in chapter 17. So he went back after he had put the plague on him and the drought on him. He went back to show himself, and there was sore famine in Samaria. That's the children of Israel was there, not Judah. Children of Israel, meaning of the northern kingdom, the ones under Jeroboam who had seceded or pretty much broke off of the rulership under Rehoboam. This is the story in 2 Kings after Solomon, after he fell, when the Most High promised him that he was going to tear the kingdom from his hands. And he meant he would rent the kingdom in two. That's what happened. It was the northern and southern kingdom, Judah and northern Israel, in the north, rather, or Israel in the north. So anyway, Ahab called Obadiah, that's right, the same Obadiah here, which was the governor in his house. Now Obadiah feared Yahweh greatly. And it was so when Jezebel cut off the prophets of Yahweh. And Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them in the cave by 50, and hid them in the cave and fed them with bread and water. Good man. And Ahab said to Obadiah, "Go into the land and all the foundations of water and all of the brooks, that perhaps we may find grass to save the horses and the mules alive, that we lose not all the beasts." So they divided the land between them and passed throughout it. And Ahab went one way by himself, and Obadiah went another way by himself. And as Obadiah was on the way, behold, Elijah met him, and he knew him, and fell on his face and said, "Art thou my lord Elijah?" And he said, "I am. Go tell thy lord, behold, Elijah is here." He said, "Go tell your lord, Elijah is here." So he went to Ahab, and he said, "What have I sinned, that thou would deliver thy servant into the hand of Ahab to slay me?" Meaning that he thought when he saw Elijah, he knew that was his ass. At least that's what he thought. And he said, "No, Yahweh liveth, there is no nation or kingdom, whether Yahweh hath not sent to seek thee." And when they said, "He is not there," he took an oath of the kingdom and nation, that they found thee not. Now sayest thou, "Go tell thy Lord, behold, Elijah is here." So he's basically saying that everybody that went to look for him after he put the plague on him, nobody could find him. So now he's saying that you're going to put me in jeopardy to tell him that I'm not here and I'm not with you. And he said, "This shall come to pass as soon as I am gone from thee, that the Spirit of Yahweh shall carry you where I know not. So when I come and tell Ahab, he cannot find thee. He shall slay me. And he cannot find me, he shall slay me. But I, thy servant, fear Yahweh from thy youth." So he's telling them that this is not Elijah, this is the other guy. This is Obadiah telling him. He said, "Now as soon as I'm gone from you, the Spirit of Yahweh shall carry me where I know not. So when I come to tell him and he cannot find me, he shall slay me." So he said, "And I was not told, my Lord, what I did when Jezebel slew the prophets of Yahweh, how I hid 100 men of men of the Lord's prophets in the cave, in the 50 by..." Let me read this slow. I'm just trying to get ahead of myself. Yahweh's prophets by 50 in the cave and fed them with bread and water. Okay? He said, "And now thou sayest, Go tell my Lord, behold, Elijah is here, he shall slay me." So listen. So he said, Elijah said, "As Yahweh liveth, before whom I stand, I will surely show myself unto him today." So he basically told him, you can be assured that I'm going to show myself to him. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him. And Ahab went to meet Elijah. And it came to pass, when Elijah saw him, and Ahab saw him, art thou he that troubleth Israel? Meaning he put that plague on him. And he said, I have not troubled Israel, but thou and thy father's house, and that ye have forsaken the commandments of the Elohim, and has followed Baalim. Now therefore send and gather me all Israel unto Mount Carmel, and the prophets of Baal 450, and the prophets of the groves 400, which eat at Jezebel's table, which was the queen or the wicked one who ruled over the prophets. And if they didn't succumb to her, she had them killed. So the Most High had Elijah tell Ahab to bring all of the prophets and all of those who went astray, who were ruling over Israel spiritually, to come down there and meet him at Carmel, Mount Carmel, which was incidentally where the Messiah was ascended. Anyway, Elijah came unto the people and said, How long ye between two opinions? If Yahweh be God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people answered him not a word. And then Elijah said unto the people, even I only, remain a prophet of Yah. But if Baal's prophets are 450 men, let them therefore give us 2 bullocks, and let them choose 1 bullock for themselves, and cut them in pieces, and lay it on wood, and put no fire under. And I will dress the other bullock, and lay it on wood, and put fire under it. And ye shall call on the name of your gods, and I will call on the name of Yahweh. And the Elohim that answereth by fire, let him be God. And all the people answered and said, It is well spoken. So he was basically challenging them, saying that he's going to set up a sacrifice, as they did, that was customary in Israel. And he was saying that if their God, who was Baalim, was the real God, then they would come and they would light the fire under it and would consume the sacrifice. But if they not, and Yahweh is, then they're going to have to deal with them. So let's keep reading. And he says, and you call on the name of your gods, and I will call on the name of Yahweh. And that Elohim that answers by fire, let him be God. So he's saying, whoever answers by fire is God. And let all the people answer and said, It is well spoken. And Elijah said to the prophets, Baal, choose you 1 bullock for yourselves, and dress it first, for ye are many, and call on the name of your gods, and put no fire under it. And they took the bullock which was given to them, and they dressed it and called on the name of Baal from the morning till evening, or from the morning until noon, saying, Baal, oh, hear us. So they was praying to him, but he wasn't listening. Okay? And he said, it came to pass, Elijah started mocking him and said, Cry loud, for he is a God. Either he is talking, or he is pursuing, or he's in a journey. Perhaps he's sleeping, or maybe he's awake. And he cried aloud. So he started taunting him. He said, maybe he's asleep, or he's in a journey. He's busy right now. You know, the joke, the sarcasm that would come with somebody in his position. And it says, and they cried aloud and cut themselves. That's how pissed he got them. And they cut themselves after the manner with knives and lances till the blood gushed out. And it came to pass when midday was gone, they prophesied until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, and there was neither voice nor any to answer, nor any that regarded. And Elijah said to the people, Come near to me. And all the people came near to him. Now he's about to prove him that he's the servant of the Most High. And he repaired the altar of Yahweh that was broken down. And he took 12 stones, and according to the number of the 12 tribes of the sons of Jacob, and unto whom the word of Yahweh came, saying, Israel shall be thy name. Okay? And with the stones he built an altar in the name of Yahweh, and he made a trench about the altar, as great as would contain 2 measures of seed. And he put wood in order, and he cut the bullock in pieces and laid it on the wood. And he said, Fill 4 barrels with water and pour it on the burnt sacrifice on the wood. This is the way that they sacrificed animals before the Most High for a blood offering or sin offering. And he said, Do it a second time. And they did it a second time. And he said, Do it a third time. And they did it a third time. And when the water ran down the altar, he filled the trench also with water. And it came to pass at the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice that Elijah the prophet came near and said, Yahweh, Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, or Jacob, let it be known this day that thou art the Elohim in Israel, and that I am thy servant, and that I have come and I have done all these things at thy word. Hear me, O Yahweh, hear me, that these people may know that thou art Yahweh Elohim, and that thou hast turned their back, and thou hast turned their back again. Mm-mm-mm. Then the fire of Yahweh fell and consumed the burnt sacrifice, and the wood and the stones. Fire consumed the stones too, and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. So it took everything. It even licked up the water. And when the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, Yahweh, he is God. The Elohim, he is God. And Elijah said to them, take the prophets of Baal, all of those ones who couldn't get their fire going, and their Elohim didn't show up, or their false god didn't show up. He said, let not one of them escape. And he took them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and killed them, slew them there. Now let's get to the fire. Now Jezebel told him what Elijah had done, and how he had slain the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger unto Elijah and said, So let the gods do to me, and more also, if I let not thy life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. So he threatening Elijah. So Yahweh speaks to him, and he tells him, because he was afraid of Jezebel. He had killed many prophets before then who wouldn't bow down to her and wouldn't follow their idols and their false gods. So I'm gonna go to where he starts to burn down the fire. Right? And that was 2 Kings. Hold on, let me find it. So moving on to the fire, it says Moab rebelled against Israel. This is 2 Kings. We read about Elijah in 1 Kings at the end of that, where he raised the kid from death, and he slew all of the prophets of Baal, who were Israelites, by the way. And it says, here is when we're going to get into the fire. All of the characteristics laid out in Revelation. Now it says, now, Ahab died, and at the end of 1 Kings, Ahab dies in battle. That was the judgment. His wife was Jezebel, and he allowed his wife, who was a Moabite, to rule over the children of Israel. And Ahaziah fell down through a lattice in his upper chamber that was in Samaria. He was the king that succeeded him, and was sick, and sent messengers, and said unto him, Go, inquire of the devil, Beelzebub, the god of Ekron, whether I shall recover of this disease. He says, But the angel of Yahweh said to Elijah the Tishbite, Arise and go and meet the messengers of the king of Samaria, and say unto them, Is it not because there is not a God in Israel that ye go up to inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron? Most High told him to go out there and check him. And he says, Therefore thus saith Yahweh, Thou shalt not come down from that bed on which thou art gone up, but thou shalt surely die. So Elijah saying, because you went to seek the counsel of a demon, you're a dead man. And when the messengers turned back to him, he said to them, Why are you turned back? And he said, There came a man up to meet us. And he said, Go, turn again to the king that sent you, and say unto him, Thus said Yahweh, is it not because there is not a God in Israel that thou sendest up to inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron? Therefore thou shalt not come down from that bed on which thou art gone up, but thou shalt surely die. And he said to them, What manner of man was he that came up to meet you and told you these words? And they answered him and said, He was a hairy man, girded with a girdle of leather about his loins. And he said, It is Elijah the Tishbite. Then the king sent unto him a captain of 50 with his 50. So he sent them some 50 guys up, and he went up to him, and behold, he sat at the top of the hill and spake to him, Thou man of God, the king saith, Come down. And Elijah said to the captain of 50, If I be a man of God, then let fire come down from heaven and consume thee and thy 50. And there came down fire from heaven and consumed them and his 50. Remember, they came there to harm him. Remember, the prophecy tells you in 11, if any man harm him, fire proceedeth out of their mouth and destroy their enemies. And again, he sent him another captain with his 50. And he said and answered and said unto him, O man of God, thus saith the king, come down quickly. And Elijah said unto him, If thou be a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and consume thee and thy 50. And the fire of God came down, or the fire of Yah came down from heaven and consumed him and his 50. So that's the second set. And he sent again a captain of the third 50 with his 50. And the third captain of the 50 went up and came and fell on the knees before Elijah and besought him and said, O man of Yah, I pray thee. So this one knew he was smart. He said, Let my life and the life of these 50 thy servants be precious in thy sight. And the angel of Yahweh said to Elijah, Go down with him, and be not afraid of him. And he arose and went down with him unto the king. And he said unto him, Thus saith Yahweh, For as much as thou hast sent messengers to inquire of Beelzebub, the king of Ekron, it is not because there is no God in Israel to inquire of this word. He said, Is it not because there is not any God in Israel to inquire of his word? Therefore thou shalt not come down off that bed which you are going up, but thou shalt surely die. Now the rest of the acts of Ahaziah, which he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? That's 1st and 2nd Chronicles. So there's your fire aspect. So this is demonstrated as laid out in Revelation 11. Everything, the fire, the plagues, and the healing part. That's the part we're going to get to next. Now let's look at that. Let's look at him in this aspect. There we go. Now listen to this. He said, Now before the day cometh that shall burn as an oven, and all the proud, yea, all those who do wickedly shall be stubble. This is the prophet Malachi. And the day that cometh shall burn them up. And we talking about fire here now? Saith Yahweh of hosts, that it shall leave them neither root nor branch. But unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise. That's been changed. That's S-O-N. For sure. With healing in his wings. And ye shall go forth and grow up as calves in the stall. And ye shall tread down the wicked, like we read in Enoch when he gives the sheep a sword. For they shall be ashes under the soles of your feet in the day that I shall do this, saith Yahweh of hosts. And he said, Remember ye the law of Moses my servant. This is why all of the Christians who profess that the law of Moses and the covenant in the Old Testament is obsolete, therefore rendered useless, that is an abomination, and that is a doctrine of devils. He said to remember it, which I command unto him in Horeb for all Israel, with his statutes and judgments. And he says, Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of Yahweh Elohim. And this is how we know this is not, because a lot of people mistook this for being John the Baptist who came before Messiah. He says, He shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. John the Baptist didn't do this. Elijah does this. And as you can see, as Enoch, remember Enoch was caught up, never tasted death. So let's look at where he was caught up, never tasted death. That's the reason why these are the two who will come back as the two witnesses, because they haven't tasted death. They weren't under the constraints that we have here in the flesh or in this realm. And they were given those heavenly garments when their Most High took them. So that would be Second Kings. Second Kings when he's taken them, right? All right, well, let me go to the scriptures and find that.